Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pre-Conciliar Radio. I am your host, TLM Ryan. Today, we are going to be diving in to the data surrounding the retention crisis in the post-conciliar church. New data set has come out. We're going to jump right into it and see what it reveals about the post-conciliar reforms and the Second Vatican Council. So let me add this. We're going to discuss it. So this, before we jump in, want to cite our source. This is from Ryan Burge. He's a professor at a university, does a lot of this data, excellent graphs. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. He states that Catholics have a huge retention problem, and it's been going on for generations. And he's got the data to back it up. But we need to really unpack what this graph is showing because it reveals a lot more than a retention problem. It reveals a retention problem that can be traced back to the Second Vatican Council, and I'm going to show you why. So what's key about this, when I first read it, it looked like the retention problem started in the late or mid-1920s. That's actually not true, because if you'll see here on the x-axis, that is when the person was born. Okay, so it's not the year. What the top line shows is the percent of Americans that were raised Catholic. So they were born into a Catholic family. And the blue line shows it at the time of the survey response, if that individual is still Catholic. So I dug into this a bit, and I'd like to focus right here on the divergence point, because I think this shows us something very curious. I'm going to make the case in this video that this actually shows how much of the post-conciliar practices you can absorb before it becomes a direct threat to your faith. And I will caveat that with, these are only if you're responding in terms of identity. It does not ask if you are a devout or regular Mass attending Catholic. So we should keep that in mind as well. But in terms of identification and for purposes of this video, we're just going to go off of self-professed identity. This divergence point is very curious, and that's what I'm going to talk about here. So I tried to zoom in as close as I possibly could, and the best I can get is that is about the year 1924. Okay, so these are 15-year demarcations on these lines, and so this would be about 1924. That means that if you were born in 1924, you were 46 years old when the council and the main reforms of the council, particularly the new Mass, was promulgated. So you would have been a 46-year-old if you were born in 1924, attending New Novus Ordo for the first time. Okay. Now, the average life expectancy of someone born in the 20s is 65. Okay, it's a little lower for men, it's a little higher for women. So I split it down the middle, it's 65. That means that right here in this divergence point, anybody who's still alive at the time of the council, and then presumably if they died at an average time of roughly 65, they would have spent 70% of their life in the pre-conciliar church, okay? And 30% of it would have been experiencing the new Mass, some of the new sacraments. And it is that point, it is in excess of 30% exposure that we start to see the divergence. Okay. So let's look here. Let's go back in time to people who were born before that. You can see we have 100% retention. Okay. So what was their Novus Ordo exposure rate? Let's go to 1905. Again, I'm using the 65 average lifespan. If you were born in 1905, on average, you would have had 100% Latin mass exposure. What do we see here? 100% retention. What if you were born in 1910? 92% Latin mass exposure. What if you were born in 1915, right around here? That is 85% Latin mass exposure. And then 1920, right before we experienced this divergence, you would have been exposed, your life would have seen 77% Latin Mass or Pre-Conciliar Catholicism exposure. Once we crest below 70%, exposure to the way things the church had always done them, you start to get a falling away, a divergence. It does not match up 100%. This portion right here is excellent. That's really healthy. We know that in the 1950s, there was still 75% weekly mass attendance, but we were starting to see a bit of a fall off. Not so here. Really good retention here. This is what we want to get back to, okay? So when do we see the impact of the Second Vatican Council really show up? Actually, right about here. Now, this line here, let's see. This would be 1965. This line right here, being born in 1965. Okay. So the council's going on, but some, and there's some adjustments to the mass, but not fully. But it is right at this point where, for all intents and purposes, your average Catholic is being 100% saturated with the post-conciliar reforms. And what's curious here is you're going to see something in the raised Catholic percentage. It starts to plateau, okay? We see that right here. In fact, it dips. But right around the council, we see a plateau. But not so with the blue line. The blue line continues to decline. Now, you might ask yourself, and this is very important to know, just to be able to understand this graph, is why do we see such growth in the percentage of the American population that is Catholic? America is historically a Protestant country. Well, I did a bit of research. It's patently obvious, after like one Google search, that there was just massive immigration from historically Catholic countries in Europe around this time, around the 1920s. Southern Europe and Eastern Europe are very Catholic, generally speaking, and that is precisely where the immigration patterns were coming from in the 1920s. Earlier in the 1850s, it was Irish Catholics, but we really got a shot in the arm, Catholic-wise, around this time. Go to about the time of the council, then you see those Catholic families who would, baptize and raise their children Catholic. They start coming from Latin American countries. So now that's what's very curious here is it doesn't boost, there are some in the church who think that immigration from Latin American countries, again, more historically Catholic, although certainly not in present day, but historically Catholic, they believe that that may turn America into a Catholic nation. The data is not bearing that out. They don't have strong faith lives down there, and when they come over, they often leave the faith. And we're seeing that here. We see that if you're plateauing, if all of your immigrants are coming from historically Catholic countries, and you're not seeing this continue to rise, that's a problem. And oh, look how curious it is that it ceases rising around the time everybody who is born would have been experiencing the Vatican II reforms. I'm not surprised at all. But the blue line tells an even more dismal story, because as this plateaus, this does not plateau. You would at least, I wouldn't say like to see, but it wouldn't be as bad if your bad retention numbers stayed stable. The retention numbers are getting worse. We're losing even more people. And the way we know this is because we see a straight line here at the top, but the blue line continues to trend down. Okay? So the bleeding has not stopped. What else do I have here in my notes? The ultimate takeaway from this. Okay, so really what this graph is showing is a linear projection of a statistic that's been cited by many people in the church. Bishop Barron, other people who are concerned with retention. I've cited it on this channel, which is for every convert, you lose 8.4 Catholics. Okay. This just kind of shows it in a more visual graphical presentation. But it's not, it's a little more than that. What it shows is that contrary to anecdotal data, we do see some fervent converts, which is great. Happy for them. Besides that anecdotal data, we continue to see the church in free fall. It is not slowing down. It is getting worse. Why is it getting worse? Well, what this data shows is that if you exceed 30% exposure to the reforms of the Second Vatican Council, you will start to see these results. Okay? And here, when you reach 100% saturation with the Second Vatican Council, you get an even steeper decline. The more of the Pre-Conciliar Church you can expose yourself to, whether by the grace of God you were born very far before the council, or in today, seeking, the modern day, seeking it out, the greater chance you have of remaining in the church. It is a mathematical certainty. This shows it, and this shows the variety of paths that you can take based on your exposure to either a pre-conciliar version of the church or a post-conciliar version of the church. The one rather sad takeaway I had from this, and I'll leave you with that, is that in this time period, the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, it was prevailing demographic, almost a foregone conclusion or projection that America, should it continue on its present course, would one day become Catholic. There were several reasons for that. Three that I'd like to highlight. One is immigration. We see that here in the raised Catholic line. I earlier explained why we see that increase. So you're having more Catholics come in. They had fantastic retention rates. Look at these retention rates. Excellent. So more Catholics were coming in. Catholics always remained Catholic. And if you know a little bit about the birth rate history back then, Catholics were having about 5.5 children on average, whereas the Protestants were contracepting and their populations were declining. So it was presumed, based on those projection models, that America would one day become Catholic. Today, we have many people with no evidence whatsoever claiming that that will still happen. It will not happen with this. The church squandered a fantastic opportunity, an immense opportunity to turn the greatest empire, perhaps in all of history, to turn it Catholic. It will never become Catholic if we continue on this course. The data shows it. The data on the atheists or the religiously unaffiliated continues to grow. America will become atheist. It will not become Catholic until the Catholic Church starts taking itself seriously again. The Church conquered the other great empire in history, the Roman Empire, by practicing pre-conciliar Catholicism. We've seen here the results when the church decides to practice post-conciliar Catholicism, and it is not a pretty sight. So that's the data. That's what that shows. What is a practical takeaway from this? Because it's not like we as traditional Catholics can go and conquer Rome again, and it's not as if we can go and make America Catholic again. As much as we would like to, and as much as many people claim it's going to happen, it's not going to happen in our lifetimes. So what is one to do? I would say first start with your family. I know many people who have Latin Mass and pre-conciliar sacramental options, but they do not take advantage. They endanger their children's souls by taking them to the Novus Ordo more than 30% of the time. It's usually 80+%. Okay? If you are in a position, I know not everybody is, but if you're in a position where you can expose yourself and your family to the pre-conciliar practices of the faith, which the church never abrogated, that is what you should do. And if you're in a strenuous position where, due to unjust bans of the Latin Mass, this is difficult, try to get to 70%. That seems to be the safe zone. Anything outside of that, you start to see issues, you start to see problems. So if you can do 3 out of 4 Sundays every month, that's a heck of a lot better than 0 out of 4. If you can only do 2 out of 4, that's better than 1 out of 4. It's called risk mitigation. It can help improve bad situations, and we're in a bad situation in need of dire improvement. So that's one practical thing you can do, but aim for 70+% with you and your family. I say aim for 100%. Why not? But if you can't make that work, 70% seems to be the demarcation line as to whether or not you and your children will remain Catholic. So that is it for today. Until my next broadcast, Godspeed.